Hello everyone, this is part 50 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. The appointed day came all too quickly for her, heralded by a night of intermittent periods of complete consciousness and fitful, restless bits of sleep. And so here she stood, at 5 in the morning, with the sun just barely beginning to cast the sky into a shade of smoke gray amidst a blue backdrop, the morning dew still not fully settling yet. And standing 10 feet away from her, was the strongest man in the world, dressed in simple white clothing, his hands clasped behind his back as he waited for her to get ready. She did not think she could find a much more prominent and glaring definition of the word awkward as she took off some of her heavier clothes, until she was left with nothing but the thin training clothes she'd put on under those. Finally, standing in front of him, she stood there, feeling more awkward and foolish as his silence stretched on. Apparently, she should know what to do already. Still, that wasn't the case, so she opted to ask. So, or at least try to. You're going to attack me? He see her off, speaking as though to a child, too stupid to understand that 2 plus 2 was 4. Still, she nodded, taking it in stride. It wasn't as though she expected anything less. She bowed, then took the stance of the Juoken. She stared at him for a moment, not needing to activate her Byakugan. She'd fought so many people already, she already knew where to strike an opponent. Tenketsu are always generally in the same place on the body after all. When she attacked, she didn't expect the blow to land. Even with all her speed, she could recognize the distance in power between them. And she was right. The Juoken strike was deftly cast aside with a mere wave of his hand. The simple force, deceptively gentle, was fast enough and precise enough to push her aside at just the right moment to avoid damage with the minimal amount of effort. Slow, she heard him say. She ducked, spinning with a sweep kick, that S into the cage's shin with enough force to leave her bruised, feeling as though she'd kicked a metal bar. Weak, she felt a spark of chakra against her skin, more surprising than painful as she reeled back, spinning smoothly back to her feet. She stood, blinked, and then, more through reflex than conscious thought, bent backwards, narrowly avoiding the fist that would have cracked her nose. It took her only a second to act. Reaching up, she grabbed him by the wrist, fingers searching for the tenketsu there and sealing it as she lashed out with one foot, kicking him just below his arm as she twisted outstretched wrist with her whole body, in a move that would have dislocated his arm from his shoulder and cracked his wrist at the same time. She felt his wrist just barely reach the breaking point when it sprang back like some elastic band of corded muscle. She lost her balance, barely keeping her footing as she released him, backing away with a grimace as she almost fell before recovering. I did not expect such innovation in taijutsu from one who was trained solely in the rigid arts of the Juoken. She almost took it as a compliment, but his next statement overshadowed whatever backhanded praise could be found there. But the attack before that left you open. It was foolish and reckless. Now, activate your Byakugan, he said. Do not think you can fight me with anything but your best. She nodded, and with a thought, the veins around her eyes bulged, the B flow maximizing as she activated her clan's coveted bloodline. And gasped with horror. "Na Naruto-sama, you're..." "Ignore it," he interrupted, his voice as flat as she'd ever heard it, not the least perturbed as he beckoned her with his hand. "Fight me with all your strength, Hyuga. I must know your limits." It took her a moment longer, but she nodded eventually, easing herself into her stance again before the first day of training resumed. With her trying to ignore what only her eyes could see. Kisame sighed. The sound emerged as a frustrated huff through his nostrils. "This is hardly a medical thesis I'm asking you to do, damn it. How in the hell are you struggling with a basic water jutsu when all it does in this miserable place is rain?" To be perfectly fair to the former Kumout Ofsuna Kanoiki, there were two major factors that were the cause of her slow progress. The first was the water element itself. Her prime element, lightning, was a rush of energy. One needed to catch and hold onto the flows and eddies of chakra at every moment. It was like trying to catch 100 fireflies with nothing but your hands in a rush of movement. It was a crackling, sporadic power, where one's mind and chakra needed to be in constant motion to keep its form stable and contained, explosive energy in a glass bottle. Water, however, was almost the exact opposite. One needed only small nudges and shifts to control its form and power. Conditioning herself to this new form of manipulation was like trying to condition a reflex. Extremely difficult and extremely slow progress. Once she got it down, however, her progress would move steadily. Or at least, they hoped so. The second factor that was making this even slower was a simple fact. Kisum was a horrible teacher. Literally, the first lesson he'd assigned for her was to throw a bucket, an empty bucket mind you, and ordered her to fill it with the moisture in the air outside their cave. Even she knew one first needed to know how to move water in a puddle, or a pond, or a full bucket at all before that could happen. She glared at the former Kiri ninja. He glared right back. Answer, with deliberately slow movements she grasped the bucket in her hands, picked it up and walked outside where sheets of rain were still falling from the sky. Returning less than a minute later, she planted a full bucket of water at his feet, right next to the fire pit before she sat down, her clothes speckled with rainwater from the brief moments she'd been outside to place and take back the bucket. If you're doing this, you're starting from the basics, she said. Kisum's upper lip curled in distaste. She panted and wheezed, her breath between her teeth sucking in air that burned her lungs as she leaned on her knees. Her hair was matted to her skin with sweat and her muscles ached. In front of her, Naruto stood, as impassive as ever, barely even looking as though he'd become mildly winded. She deactivated her Byakugan long enough ago for the sight she'd witnessed to vanish from her immediate thoughts. It would return at a later time, certainly to haunt her mind. But for now he seemed untouched, neutral, and utterly devoid of an opinion on her performance at the moment. The reality was, that the Godime Hokage was very much deep in thought, and it was only the fact that he normally kept his features expressionless that sheer force of habit kept his brows from crinkling and his lips from tilting downwards in a thoughtful frown. The girl was, or had been, of adequate enough strength and skill for her station. She was innovative, resourceful, and disciplined. But she needed to be more than that now. Hinata was her greater in every sense of the word, and it had still not been enough to keep her safe. No, if she was to take his former teammate's place, then she would have to become better than Hinata, stronger, able to compete with any ninja. And he would have to make sure that happened soon. Get up, he said. We are done for today. Hanabi stayed where she was for a moment, deigning to continue catching her breath. For the time being. Finally, as Naruto was reaching the edge of their sparring ground, she spoke up. So what exactly do you have in mind for the next training session? You will have to learn much. He answered simply. I can't be that bad. She protested, glaring at his back. It is not enough. He shrugged his shoulders. You must be better. Sparing her a glance, he could see the mild disappointment in her face. No doubt she'd expected some positive note on her performance so far, which had been better than average certainly. But he wouldn't give it today. He'd make her crave it, make her work hard for it. Even if she hated him by the end of this, she would still value his respect enough to value his congratulations long after their training was done. How much better? She asked and regretted it soon thereafter, knowing the answer already. She needed to be as good as Hinata. Naruto paused, correctly guessing her train of thought. He wondered for a moment what to answer her, when words from a past long left behind him pulled themselves up from the shifting sands of memory. You will be the tip of the sword, he said. She looked at him oddly, and he turned to face her fully, as he remembered another person doing so long ago. With his stare he captured her attention, with his voice he ensnared her, subtle techniques preying on her senses making him seem all the greater to her. You will be the edge of the blade. The breath of his voice would slither into her mind, and bury itself there, an idea to be planted, a thought to be controlled. You will be my shield. He stepped closer, and Hanabi found herself suddenly face to face with him as she felt pinned by that cold gaze. My teachings shall be your armor. These words and so many others through his thoughts, the rules and oaths that served as the seams to his person, flashing through memory before being picked and discarded in favor of the ones that would best serve him here. You will be a true shinobi of Konohagakure. And then, Hanabi knew that these were not empty words, that this was no simple speech to reassure her. He meant every word, As though she had never even fully stepped into the shoes of a shinobi and had not been treading that path already. As though she'd been doing nothing but playing a game, and now it was time to get serious. And then, Hyuga Hanabi felt cold crawl down her spine. Kakashi paced slowly across the room waiting for the Godime of Konoha. He'd been summoned here by an Anbu earlier in the morning for his next orders. It was business as usual, it seemed. He was told by one of the servants that Naruto was attending someone else, and to wait here. He wasn't sure who exactly could occupy so much of his time though. He'd been here almost an hour already. Normally Naruto spoke 3 words to any one person followed by a very pointed and deliberate, leave, or, begone, or something else to that general effect. Whoever it may have been, he was fairly sure it wasn't Jiraiya. The rumor mill placed him as storming out of this house the other night and drinking himself to a stupor in one of Konoha's seedier bars before returning to his home. If they had some kind of argument, or worse, then it boded ill. Jiraiya's pride would not let him apologize even if he eventually regretted what he may have said or if he realized he wasn't in the right in their argument. And Naruto. Yay, he wasn't even going to bother giving the absurd notion of the Devil King apologizing a full thought. When the door finally slid open, the person standing there was hardly whom he was expecting. Sabaku. He greeted, somewhat uncertainly as she marched towards him, a determination in her face and walk. He felt for a moment, like fodder caught in the warpath, he half expected her to attack him by the time she opened her mouth. I need to talk to you. Really? Because it looks more like you want to punch me in the face or something. He thought, lifting a single thin eyebrow. He ventured carefully. She crossed her arms, glaring up at his single exposed eye. You need to do something about Naruto. Kakashi figured that this conversation would involve his estranged former subordinate out-off student, but this was hardly how he thought she would voice it. Sure. Let me just walk up to him with a kunai and punch it through his tea. It'll be easy. And I'd be more than willing to do this just because you asked nicely. I don't mean it like that, you idiot. The Suna princess snapped. Ire and frustration had been eating away at her since she'd witnessed that little exchange between Naruto and the Toad Senin Jiraiya. I may be a prisoner here, but even I can see that he needs help right now. Kakashi jerked his head up a bit, caught more than just a little off guard by this. Though, considering that she'd gone to help them when Naruto had been captured, maybe he shouldn't be. His mind returned to his little encounter with Kurenai at the memorial stone for a moment before pushing it away. And just what makes you think I can do anything? What makes you so sure anything needs to be done at all? He asked. She looked at him as though he were crazy. Are all of you Konoha nin this dumb, or is it acquired while rising in rank? He shrugged, exerting a significant effort to hold back a sigh. Look, Sabaku, I don't know what you may be thinking right now, but Naruto is fine, trust me. In all truth, if she was putting up this much of a fuss, he suspected Naruto may even be manipulating her, putting on some show to get her sympathetic so he could use her more effectively later. The fact that he may have been exploiting Hinata like this, the fact that he knew him to be capable of such a thing, filled him only with an aching sadness. Was that why he and Jiraiya had fought? Had to be. Jiraiya may have been many things, but he was, firstly, a man of rare honor in this profession, who would feel sickened at the very thought of this. He may have been able to accept the necessity of this in some extreme cases, but this was hardly an extreme case. And this was Hinata. And that, made this wound see deeper than it should. He focused back on the captured princess as she shook her head. What the hell is wrong with you? Do you even care at all? Nothing is wrong with me. Or anyone else really, he said, meeting her eyes. You really think he cares? That he's even capable of it? She opened her mouth to speak, but he see her off, he'd picked up momentum, and he wasn't really trying to stop. Don't you think we've searched for it? Again and again, hoping we'd find something. Years and years of watching and fighting at his side. And we've never even seen a flicker behind those eyes, or a moment's remorse for anything that he's done. His voice was never raised, but it was severe, hardened with grief and simple truth. We hoped for something long before you ever showed up here, Sabaku, so don't you come now, at the end of this road, and think that you can preach to me. Because I care enough, to stay, and fight by a leader who would just as easily see me as by his own hand as he would see me made a general if he thought it would serve his war effort well enough. She swallowed, biting her lip as she shook her head. Behind closed eyes, Kakashi could not tell if she was fighting back her anger, or her sadness. "He isn't heartless as you people think," she finally said. "And if he is, you have only yourselves to blame for that." The copycat stared at her for a long while. "Somehow, I doubt even you believe that Sabaku." Footsteps down the hall was their only warning before Naruto stepped through the doorway, his white cage robes billowing behind him as he entered the room, hands clasped behind his back. He stared at both occupants before looking pointedly at Temari. She got the hint, and with deliberate steps, she slowly marched out of the room, keeping a wary eye on Naruto, who didn't even deign to look her way after she'd begun to leave. It was the first time she'd been face to face with him since his little explosion. She'd honestly expected more, yet she supposed with Kakashi here, he was holding himself in careful check, and it was best not to push her luck. As she left the room, Naruto walked towards the older male, hands clasped behind his back. Kakashi got a strange sense of déjà vu, standing there. His walk wasn't nearly as severe, nor his expression as open as Temari's had been, but the feeling of being the fodder caught in the warpath of some beast was still there. Nevertheless, he nodded, and stood at the blonde's side as the man leaned on the railing of the balcony. There was silence only for a few, lengthy seconds before Naruto broke it after what seemed like a moment of contemplation. "I'm sending you to Kiri." "Why?" the copy nin asked. "They got a new overseer last month, another one isn't scheduled until." "I know, but we cannot afford for anything to go wrong. With Ginchiko and Guan both Kiri is looking to new leaders, Guan's adopted son amongst them. You are to go and make sure that our holdings there are secure and that those of influence within whatever separatist factions are kept muzzled and barking at walls. Kiri is too valuable to the war effort to be lost now because of neglect and overconfidence." The copycat slowly nodded. "This is a bit sudden. You have 3 days to prepare. I will grant you the seal of authority, making you the overseer of Kiri immediately upon your arrival. You may take 4 junior Junins and 6 veteran Chunin, as an escort of your choice." "That's..." the Sharingan wielder began, swallowing somewhat thickly with his surprise. Quite a lot. He'd commanded groups of men this size before, but never a group that Naruto had just granted him free choice of who went and who didn't. With 10 carefully chosen people whose skills could complement one another, he had enough potential power to do almost anything in Kiri as an overseer. Not that Kiri didn't have some exceptional ninja of their own, but many of those were on missions, and it was rare for any 2 of them to be at the village at the exact same time. Given the fact that every overseer's duty was to try and avoid the strongest of their appointed vassal villages linking up for any potential time period if they could. As I said, Kiri is too important to lose now. The sheer level of trust that Naruto was placing on him, the full implications of this, into Kakashi like a club upside his head, and he actually felt as though he would be left physically reeling from the sheer shock of it. The words from Kurenai and, more recently, Temari returned to him, and he wondered for a moment whether he should do as they asked and, at the very least, try. Even if it turned out to be a wasted effort, he should at least try before he cried defeat. But before he could give voice to his sudden urge, Naruto straightened, pushing himself away from the mezzanine railing before he looked to the man. "You are dismissed, Kakashi." Yes, Naruto," he said, loosing his nerve as he bowed his head before the man. When Gaara walked into his office the morning after his talk with Kankuro, it was as though a great wind was sweeping into the building in his wake. It wasn't 3 minutes into his arrival before he was barking orders and sending messengers, administrators and paper pushers scurrying into overdrive and ordering every tactician, commander, strategist and officer he had at his disposal to meet in the council chambers, the most spacious room in the tower. He'd taken Shikamaru's notes, read them, and wanted them expanded on. He wanted information, all the information they could get for him. The Kazekage became a bee machine by the time the first words had been spoken in the meeting, absorbing anything and everything the assembled group were telling him. He was in command of a country, the last country, so to speak. And he left it in no uncertain terms that he was very serious about his command. Preparations for the eventual siege had been underway for months, but estimates of enemy numbers were so overwhelming that few believed they could truly hold against the tide with the city intact. The hours pass in blurs of statistical outlays, calculations, graphs, maps of the city, overviews. the food supplies for the entire city, how long they will last once nothing can be brought in from outside the walls, where the food is stored, the durability of these silos, buildings and granaries, what weapons and theorized jutsu strength they can withstand, ration projections, sustainable food ration planning, unsustainable food ration planning with appended lists of estimated casualties, where food riots are likely to break out in the city once starvation is a reality. Water wells, reserves and supply centers, how many are required to supply the entire population? Which one of these are likely to be destroyed first once the city walls fall, underground rivers and wellsprings under, or near the city that might be tapped when the need was greatest? Estimates of disease once the city is finally attacked and casualties become too heavy to be dealt with effectively, types of disease, symptoms, severity, risk of contagion. Lists of medical facilities, endless papers of how each one is supplied, withering down to the most minute detail. Numbers of conscripted civilians, crudely force-trained in the arts of chakra and weaponry, training regimes and schedules, medical and food supplies for the civilian population. Suna and Kumo remnant defense forces, who lead the individual squads, their weapons, tactics, specialities, assigning them in turn targets and districts to defend where they'd be most efficient. Refugee civilian numbers, gods above what numbers. Major roads and byways come next. Concourses to be used for effective civilian transport to the shelters and caves below the city and that could be used to supply the ninja and whatever militia forces would be on the walls. On and on the simulations, calculations and predictions went. And this, the Kazekage sat through for 3 days straight. 3 days. At the dawn of the 4th day, barely an hour into the meeting, the man stood up, startling his aides and advisors. It was the first real movement they'd seen him give since the meetings even started. Normally he would just sit there, eyes showing that he was listening to the speaker, but neither nodding nor speaking in turn. As he finished standing, a young woman, sitting closest to him, whose name he could not fully remember, spoke up to him. "Is something wrong, Kazekage Dono?" she asked. And slowly, a smile formed on the redhead's face, calm, sanguine even as he replied. "Nothing's wrong, nothing at all." Baki was hardly a man to give in to simplistic outbursts of shock, but in this one particular instance. No, absolutely not. His shout could be heard clear across the battlements that lined the city walls. Now, as stated, Baki was never a man to give in to simple outbursts, much less to figures that held a higher rank or authority than him. There weren't many of those, of course, at this point in his life, but there were a few still. So it would be quite shocking to anyone who knew him that he would be directing this outburst to none other than the highest-ranking ninja in Suna. And, Gaara wasn't one to throw the weight of his rank around frequently, but even he couldn't help but state, "I don't think that's something you're supposed to say to your Kage," somewhat crossly. "It is when he's gone insane." His former sensei shot back, climbing the steps up to the wall with a shake of his head, muttering all the way as the wind whipped up sand to lash at their faces and clothes. "I haven't gone insane, this will work. No, this might work. And you're banking entirely on the fact that he might not see it coming, which would be banking entirely on the maybe that his arrogance or distraction or God knows what else may have overtaken his tactics. Everything in war is a gamble." Gaara replied, nipping at the man's heels as he followed. "You taught me that. You gamble smart in war, Gaara, not stupid. If this succeeds, Baki. If it succeeds, it'll be magnificent, a blaring victory to go in the records, morale will soar, the enemy will have a much harder time securing a beachhead here, you may even be able to buy us a month, or hell, 3 months before they're ready to attack, and we'll all come out smelling like sunshine and roses." "How exactly does one smell like sunshine?" the Kazekage muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But, Baki continued, irritated at the interruption. "If this doesn't work, you'll basically cripple our defenses on a complete gamble, and whatever chance we have of holding the city suffers a premature death. Hell, even if your plan does succeed, it wouldn't exactly be crippling enough to make them open negotiations. Our estimates show they'd still be able to feasibly amass enough manpower to bulldoze right over us. They'd have a much tougher time of it." The redhead shot back. At this, Baki stopped walking, turning around to look at his old student, who was still an inch or two shorter than him, in the eye. "The risk isn't worth the gain, Gaara." The Kazekage sighed, rubbing his head. "We need first be in this war, Baki. We've got to show both our men and Konoha that to take this place it is going to cost them. Morale is at the floor right now, and getting worse every day in our own forces, let alone Kumo, or the refugee and civilian population. Baki's lips pursed, taking a deep breath through his nostrils. He opened his mouth to speak again when Gaara held up his hand. Just. The Kazekage interrupted, stopping him, exasperated frustration on his face. I've had people telling me I'm crazy all morning. Just tell me if we have the resources to make an operation like this and how soon we can have it ready. Baki s his forehead, rubbing his face as though trying to banish away his own frustration. Would you believe me if I told you no? Gaara smiled as the older man rolled his eyes. Give me. He began shrugging his arms. I don't know, 10 days. And I'll get everything together. Gaara smiled, turning around to leave, and offering only a backward wave as he heard his former teachers shout. And if this doesn't work, I'm gonna get Kankuro to hurt you. Wasn't sure what you'd like. Yue Ying stopped her writing, the brush held firmly in her hand, black tip held just centimeters off the parchment, as she turned her head to the doorway. A familiar Sanin stood there, looking as young in face, skin and posture as ever, but unmistakably older, so much older than the last time she'd seen her. They were all a little older now, weren't they? In one hand, though, Ying was not surprised to find a bottle of sake, being brandished as though in offering. 2 cups were held in her other hand. So I just decided to get the most expensive. The blonde finished, shrugging her shoulders as she stepped into the room. Ying, with as much poise and calm as one would expect from her careful husband, set down her calligraphy brush and put aside her scroll, making space at the table before Sunad sat down across from her, planting the cups on the wooden surface before serving them both and putting down the bottle. Ying took her cup, raising it in toast towards the Sanin before drinking. After the first shot, the two sat in silence for a while before Ying decided to speak up. Did you come to offer your condolences, Sunad, or merely as an excuse to drink more expensive sake? The slug princess gave a single, half laugh, bitter sounding as she shrugged her shoulders again. Bit of both, I guess. Ying sighed through her nostrils, accepting a refill of her cup. You should not drink so much at your age, she commented. Yugito is S, the Sanin said with another shrug. So is Zhuge Liang, Akina's gone, and Shizune is S too. What does it matter if I drink at this point? You do not plan on surviving the coming battles. Do you think any of us will survive at this point? Not really, the brunette answered truthfully, but I do not have my husband's confidence in the Kazekage. You don't think he's see out for this? He could be, she admitted, taking another drink, her fourth, her fifth, but as he stands now, no, I don't think he's ready. Sunad threw back another drink, and their conversation fell into a lull. For whatever it's worth, the Sanin said after a time. I'm sorry for your loss. I can't say I always approved of Liang, nor did I get along overly well with him. But you must have seen something there, so. I'm sorry. Thank you, Ying said, smiling a little. He was not the easiest person to get along with, I know, but he was gentle. To you. To me, yes, and perhaps I am selfish, but he made me happy. It must be frustrating for you, the Sanin said, lying on her back, tilting her head forward only when she went to drink now. He's S, and the person that K him is already S. You mean revenge? Is that what you're waiting for then, Sunad? To revenge Shizune? The Sanin's chocolate brown eyes narrowed, glaring at the ceiling. All the survivors from the hospital say the same thing. Shizune was K by Hitaki Kakashi. And you will K him then? It wasn't a question. I will turn his bones to splinters and his organs to paste. They'll need tweezers to pick up the pieces after I'm done. You should not harbor such thoughts, the Raikage's widow said, a tinge of sadness to her voice. You will avenge Shizune, who will avenge him? When does it end? Wouldn't you want to K Sasori if you could? Sunad asked rather than answer, turning her eyes to look at the woman. To her slight surprise, Ying shook her head. To be honest, no. I am just tired, Sunad. I am tired of this war, of this fighting, of so much death. I will welcome peace when it comes, either through victory, or death. They stared at each other for a time, until finally Sunad smiled, giving another half laugh, before turning her sights back up towards the ceiling. Maybe you're a better person than me then, she said, not bothering with the glass as she simply reached over and drank directly from the bottle. When she woke, it was not to the gentle chirping of morning birds, nor was it to the glare of the sun filtering in through her windows, but rather to the harsh S of her door, and Anbu standing there, cloaked with his porcelain mask, staring at her with hollow eyes and all but dragging her out as he said a simple, "Come." She didn't have time nor the mind to really protest as the man grabbed her by the arm, dragging her down the hall before they came to another door in the house, one that she recognized was in the warded part of the estate, where she'd never been allowed passage to before. Different scenarios passed through her mind, and with each one her dread grew in the pit of her stomach, wondering just what was going on. When the door opened, the Anbu, for all intents and purposes, shoved her in and closed the door behind her, leaving her in near darkness as her eyes slowly adjusted to the dim illumination of the full moon creeping in through the windows at the far end of the room. As her eyes adjusted, she saw him there, sitting in the dark. The room had a large, almost dining room-sized table in the middle of it. He sat in one of its chairs, seemingly a randomly picked one considering he was neither at the head of the conference table nor overlooking some doents. He just sat there, the table, clean save a few sheets of paper scattered across its surface. A full minute passed with her standing there before her nervousness at being dragged down here at this ungodly hour ebbed enough for her to find her voice. "Why am I here?" "Because," he answered slowly, "I told them to bring you here." She raised a slender eyebrow. "Okay, but why did you ask them to do that?" A pause, a lengthy one this time before she saw him openly sigh, weary. "I called you here, so you could answer a question. This is like pulling teeth," she groused, rolling her eyes before another thought struck her. Is he stalling? Could he ever actually be nervous enough to resort to stalling? Apparently he could be. She passed her tongue over her dry lips, swallowing to moisten her tea before she stepped in front of him, almost within arm's reach as she saw his eyes drift up towards her own, a strange look on his face. "What was your question?" With slow, careful movements he stood, and though now he was once again at his full and imposing height, she was not alarmed. Everything in his posture indicated non-threatening. His shoulders were slumped, his head slightly bowed and his eyelids dropping just a little more than normal. He seemed tired. It was the only thing she could really describe him being right now. He seemed very, very tired. He took a breath, languid and drawn out. "Why did you defend me against Kakashi today, Sabaku?" You heard that." He nodded. "But we heard you. You heard what I wanted you to hear. Then why didn't you say anything to Kakashi right then?" "Because he was not wrong," was his solemn reply. Her eyes narrowed. "Who are you trying to convince here? Why is it you need convincing? Why is it you want to convince me?" She countered. He didn't answer, and after a moment she decided to address his first question instead. "I defended you against Kakashi today, because I know you are not heartless, you are not a monster." "How can you be so sure? So confident in that, when you yourself have seen what I have done? And what I am capable of still doing? How can you so blindly stumble on faith in the notion that I am good, when all those around you are offering testaments to the opposite?" She realized then that he wasn't just asking her this question, that, to him, this conversation was not just here, in this room, but somewhere else, with someone else. He wished to know her answer as much as he wished to know the others. Her words would be a parallel for him here, a looking glass if you will. She did not know if his mind wandered to Hinata, to that mysterious Yoshino woman, or both. But she didn't care. She had her own reasons, her own experiences, and she was a reflection of neither woman and so would not make herself speak for them. Because a heartless man, a real monster, wouldn't care enough about people to have kept these. She reached into her sleeve, thankful that even in her haste, she'd remembered to grab these things from under her pillow as she pulled them out. He looked at the items, so familiar, the butterfly pendant, the prayer beads, and the picture of Hinata's Junin ceremony. He remembered that day well. She hadn't bowed. In all the rehearsals he told her instructor not to have her bow as per the custom. There'd been disbelief at this of course, and a few had openly spoken out against it when word had leaked later that Hinata was the exception to the norm, and not, in fact, an official amendment to the ceremony. But he hadn't cared then, and he didn't care now. He would not have her bow her head like a common subordinate. She'd been much more than that. It was a small gesture, but it had been the only one he could give. Or so he'd thought anyway. Maybe he could have done more, maybe he should have. He didn't know when the items had reached his hands, but as he realized it, he felt his fingers tighten, with him barely resisting the urge to clench them into fists. I should have burned these, he admitted quietly. I should burn these. Temari watched him, feeling now, as though she held a deeper understanding now. Not so much for Naruto, but Hinata. Words, so long ago they felt as though they were spoken in another life, returned to her. What was done to him was monstrous. And they created a monster. Was this how it felt for her? Was this how Hinata felt, being the only one on her side of the fence, needing to defend both the man, and her belief in him, from everyone else, being the only one that could see more than the cold, harsh surface he willfully painted himself to the world? She watched his hands clench and felt the chakra within him slowly stir to life, and with careful movements she brought her own hands up to his, and with gentleness he'd rarely experienced he felt his fingers uncurl, and the unnatural heat receding from his palms, not yet having been coaxed to burning flames through his will. He bowed his head, as though sucking, surrendering to his own perceived weakness as his eyes closed and the slowly building will to do away with these trinkets and few sentimentalities was drained out of him at her touch. Temari stepped closer, looking up at his face as his eyes opened again to meet her own. Years down the road, hell, for the rest of her life, she would wonder just what made her do it. What insane force had overridden her normally strong self-control, her common sense, even her own pride. She leaned forward, and with almost no hesitation to speak of, pressed her lips firmly against his own. The very air seemed to go still, and if someone else was there they would have sworn that the night itself had fallen into a hush for a small window in time. She felt his lips move against her own, responding, before he stopped, and slowly pulled away. The lack of contact brought her back to her own sense as well. She felt her eyes opening wide, pure shock coursing through her mind as she felt herself trembling with a rush of emotion. No doubt he could see it, and were she in her normal mindset she may have been irritated enough to notice that his face was veiled just enough in shadow to hide the specifics of his own reaction. Without another word, he made his way past her, walking right by her side before marching out the door. And Temari stood there, wide-eyed as she brought hesitant fingers up to her lips, a myriad of emotions dancing across her skull, mounting horror being the prevalent of these as she wondered. What the hell did I just do? That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.